Hey, how you doing? It's Clayton here from howtodrawcomics.net and welcome to another comic art demonstration. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a character design that I have developed for my upcoming comic book project, and unfortunately I haven't settled on a title for it just yet, but I can tell you some of the names that I'm pondering. And the first name that I wanted to go for this comic book was Renegade Alpha. I thought that'd be pretty cool, but then I got a few people telling me that it wasn't quite clicking with them. So then another friend of mine suggested Hybrid X. Now, of course, none of these names are really going to be relevant to you at this point because, of course, you don't know really what the story is about. But I guess this video is going to give us the perfect introduction into that as I describe who this character is that I am designing right now on the screen in front of you and how they fit into the story. But let's get a little bit more technical first, just to start this video out. And I'll explain here what I am doing. Now, I'm starting out rough, as I start out any one of my character concepts, any concept actually, whether it be a character, a prop, or an environment. I always try to keep it loose because I know that especially in this stage of development, everything is open to change. There's a lot of experimentation here. I don't want to tie myself to any one decision that I make in the beginning because, you just never know when you let yourself explore a design in this way where it's going to end up. And for me, it's honestly one of the best ways I know how to come up with the most desirable design possible when you give yourself that freedom. So I'm starting out very basic. In fact, I haven't really even delved into the design of the character just yet. The designing I am doing is in regards specifically to the shoulder pad item, which I'm going to strap to one side of his body. Now, the reason that I'm taking the time to do that up on its own is because that was something that I was kind of struggling with. I wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to go for the shoulder pad, how it was going to attach to his body, what it was going to look like, and honestly determining an aesthetic for a character. And not only just that specific character, but also all the other characters that they interact with within the story, deciding on a visual theme for the book as a whole. That is the trickiest part, because here I'm just working on one character, but I've got to kind of think about exactly how is he going to fit in with the cast of other characters? Is he going to look out of place in comparison? Is his visual aesthetic going to suit the theme of the story that I'm trying to create here? So let's talk about theme for a little bit as I now go over the top of the foundational dummy model that I have done up that contains all of the anatomy of the character, the proportions, the pose, and now all I got to do is just start sketching over the top of that, trying out different design decisions along the way that may or may not stay in the final version. But again, just as before, this is very, very rough. So let me explain the theme here, because that's going to make what you're seeing me develop for the character a little bit more relevant. So this is going to be a sci-fi apocalyptic comic book. That's the theme. And with that theme established, it gives me a bucket of ideas, pre-established ideas that I can start to play with. There's a lot of archetypes within the sci-fi apocalyptic genre. There's a lot of looks that have already been created when you think about the likes of, Alien and Mad Max. If you combine the two of those together, you get a very interesting blend of visuals. So for me, I guess I was kind of trying to go for something that would allow me to uphold that 80s sci-fi vibe. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking about aliens and the colonial marines, because this guy is a soldier who in the story is leading a team of grunts to go in and rescue one of their men that have been left behind and captured by the alien invaders. Why? What is their intentions with their captive? Well, it turns out that they want to create a half alien, half human hybrid, which, as it turns out, is a deadly combination of gene splicing, and ultimately results in a giant abomination that not only knows where the human base, the human colony is situated, but can also wreak massive amounts of destruction on the human populace if indeed their experiment goes through and actually works out. So this team of men that are going into to save the guy that's been left behind are trying to get to him before that happens, because if it does happen, they're going to have to put him down. So hopefully they can rescue him, but if they can't, it's going to spell a lot of doom and gloom, either for the human colony or for the guy they're going to rescue. So this is the leader, right? He's the commander. His name at the moment is Commander Slug, not in term of the shellless snail, but more the shotgun slug. That's what it's referencing there. And of course, his other comrades are also nicknamed after firepower, various weapons. We've got Beretta, we've got Magnum, and we've got a bunch of others as well that I'm also going to be designing in the coming days, the coming weeks, in the production phase of this comic book. So I'm really looking forward to that. I know that I'm going to have a lot of fun doing it, and hopefully you will have a ton of fun watching it come together. You know, I'd really like to, as I develop this comic book, educate you on the process that I'm going through as much as possible to give you a behind-the-scenes look of how exactly a comic book comes together. This is why the channel is called what it is. It's how to draw comics, and that's exactly what I intend on teaching you here throughout the next series of videos that I'll be releasing, getting a bit tongue-tied today, throughout the remainder of this year as we develop the comic book. So you can see me here sketching in some knee pads again, just really focused on large, broad shapes here, trying to find where the placement of the elements are going to go throughout his costume design, trying to create some visual recognition throughout the various additions to the character's outfit, so that he is more of a recognizable, memorable character that will stay within the mind of the viewer, but also will be easy to tell, when he is standing among other characters, that he'll be able to be told apart by the viewer, that people will be able to recognize him as indeed Commander Slug. Because if people are getting confused between the various cast of characters that you are featuring within your book, there's a major problem. There's a design flaw there. Now, this is especially important when it comes to drawing those characters from one panel to the next from a distance, which often does happen in establishing shots, in various camera angles that you're going to pick in order to visually tell the narrative of your story. And so, because you're looking at these characters at times from quite a distance, you've got to have some signature visual cues that are associated to those characters that the viewer is instantly going to be able to pick up on, whether or not that is how their design is put together itself or how it's colored as well, because color is a big deal. Various black and white tonal values are also quite a useful tool that you can use in order to break up the character, make them extremely readable so that the viewer can automatically process who it is that they're looking at on the page and understand where they're fitting into the story at any one point in time. This is one issue that does pop up quite a lot, especially, you can see this pop up in even the mainstream comic books that are out there on the comic book shelves. You can see artists who, may be working with characters that look a little bit similar, they're dressed similar, I'm going to have to watch out for this as well when it comes to designing the other soldiers that I'll be working on for my comic book, because they're all going to be dressed up in military-looking gear. They're going to have pouches, shoulder pads, knee pads, big boots, and gun belts. And I'm going to need to make variations of all of those elements to make sure every single character that I'm developing for this book is unique in and of themselves. I want the viewer, the reader, to fall in love with all of those characters, to see the individual aspects of each and every single character, so that again, they don't just all blend into the one archetype, that they have their own personalities that are able to be expressed through the visual representation that I am creating of them, that I'm showing them as. And so, one of the ways in which I'm doing this for Commander Slug is I'm giving him a mustache, I'm messing around with his hairdo there. You can see that he's kind of got a balding mullet of sorts. I thought that'd be pretty badass. And he's not an official typical military dude. He's just kind of like the leader of the ground forces, I guess. The leader of the people as such. People look up to this guy in this post-apocalyptic world of terror and doom and gloom. The humans are on the brink. They're trying to fight back, and this world has been picked to the bone by the alien invaders that have essentially taken over everything and changed the face of the planet. They have terminated many of Earth's inhabitants. They have kept some for their own entertainment. Now, the idea with these aliens, which you will also see me design, is that basically they go from one planet to the next, invading it, and then breeding with the most dominant species of that planet in order to evolve and become the supreme beings, to go to that next level of evolution, which is the reason as to why I was going to call this book Renegade Alpha, because the main character of the story, which is the dude that's been kidnapped, that's going to be hopefully rescued in time by Commander Slug here and his team, he ends up his DNA does get spliced with the alien DNA, spoiler alert, but it's not to the extent where his mind is broken. So he is still very much of his own mind. He knows who he is, he remembers who he is, but now he has all the strengths of the alien species and the humans, and none of their weaknesses. So this is where his powers come from. One of those powers being the ability to telekinetically connect with both the aliens and the humans. And this is one of the advantages that the aliens have. This is how they communicate. They get inside your head and mess with you, but also they are able to communicate with one another telepathically, so you never really know what they're up to unless you can also read their minds, which, as it turns out, the main character of the story, Renegade Alpha, if I end up calling it that, is going to be able to do. So, but of course, later on in the book, he slowly begins to lose himself more and more as the alien DNA begins to grow within him and change his body in various ways. The humans, of course, don't help out with that, because once he is captured, they fit him with cybernetic enhancements to both repair his body, but also to advance it in order for them to be able to have on their side an extremely powerful weapon, the likes of which they have never had before, that they can use against those alien invaders. And so this is really what the story is centered around. The first issue will be Commander Slug and his team going in to attempt to rescue this poor soul, hopefully in time. And of course, you already know that he will be rescued in time, because otherwise there would be no series, no story to tell. But it's going to be a good one. They're going to go through a bunch of different battles. This first issue will be where the world is established, where the characters are introduced, and it's going to be a whole lot of fun. As you can see, I'm going for a real 90s vibe with the visuals in this book. I've got the big armor, I've got the big bulging muscles, I've got the badass looking super masculine heroes, and of course the sexy heroines to go along with them. And that's exactly the kind of book that inspired me to get into comics in the first place when I was growing up in the 90s. And you had the likes of Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee putting out these killer looking books with characters that were so much more bigger than life. They were beyond this reality, and they really allowed us to be able to live out our fantasies as those super heroic characters and engage with the story in a way in which no other comic book really had allowed us to do before the 90s. Yes, they were great and they were fantastic and people still loved those stories, but they really did give comic books a whole new edge when the Image era was given to us at the time. So that's why I've decided on the look of my comic book, and that I've come to the conclusion that this indeed is what it is going to be. And it's exactly what I've got in mind as I'm here sketching up the design for Commander Slug. Now, his design did change so much. As you can see, that shoulder pad it looks cool, and I really do not mind it looking at it again, but I did change it up because of the functionality of that shoulder pad and how exactly it was going to work when Commander Slug was in motion. Now, the thing is that as his arm moves around, that shoulder pad needs to move with it. It needs to deform properly. Now, this is something that I'm very fortunate to be extremely conscious of, because I come from a background of video games design, 3D modeling, and animation. And one of the things that you do have to look out for is how those models, when animated, are going to deform, and their costuming, the various design elements you've included upon them, along with that character, their figure as they're in motion. So when it comes to drawing my comic book characters, I'm thinking about the exact same thing. And Commander Slug was no exception, especially since he is a character with a ton of armor, all of which requires those considerations of movement. So I'm adding in some pouches around his midsection here. I thought that'd be pretty cool. I wanted to give his design a mix of simplicity, yet at the same time intricate complexity, and make sure that the two were balanced in a complementary way against one another, because I knew that if I could nail that visually, it'd create a beautiful amount of contrast within the design itself. And contrast is a wonderful thing to have in character design, because it allows you to create a more readable character. It means that as the viewer is looking at them, they are able to absorb and digest visually what it is they're seeing, as the various tones and clusters of information that resides within the details or the lack thereof throughout that design has within it. And so, you might find that your eye tends to look at the shoulder pad as a whole, even though it consists of a ton of detailed elements within it. But the level of that detail, the density, the resolution of those intricacies, they allow you to be able to read that one shape just on its own. And then once you're able to take that in, you can look at something like his arm in contrast, which has a relatively small amount of detail. There is no elbow pad, at least on that side of the arm. All that is there is just a glove. That's the only other costume element that we're seeing on his left arm as we're looking at Commander Slug here. And so what you get is this kind of this intricate complexity within the shoulder pad, and then we move on to the arm where you're seeing relatively little detail. All that's going to be there is maybe some rendering that describes the main muscle groups throughout his arm, the biceps, the triceps, and the forearm muscles. And then, of course, we jump back to a little bit more detail as we look at his glove. There's a certain amount of rhythm now that we have within the design just in that section, which is fantastic. It's detail, lack of detail, then more detail. Okay? Contrast. And then, of course, we look at his body. You can see that belt that's wrapping around the upper torso. It splits his upper body in half, but in an almost dynamic way. It's wrapping around it. It's wrapping around it. Not horizontally. It's wrapping around it on an angle. Right? Diagonally, that's the word I was looking for. And so, it's not only breaking up that upper torso, but it's breaking it up in an interesting way that's not symmetrical, but is instead asymmetrical. And this leads me on to the fact that if you look at Commander Slug's design as a whole, it is relatively asymmetrical indeed. You can see that he doesn't have a shoulder pad on the other arm. In fact, that shoulder is exposed. And then around the upper arm, where we see the biceps on the opposite side of his body, you can see that he has some pouches that are wrapped around it. And then that glove as well is also much larger than the glove on his left arm. And we got some pouches that are even attached to it. It bulks it up. It changes the shape. And so you're not just seeing contrast in terms of detail density, but you're also seeing contrast in terms of the literal shapes that are present throughout his design. Again, very important to have that asymmetry there because it leads us to a more interesting design, which means it is thus more memorable and as a result. So this is something that I'm always thinking about. There are always going to be occasions where, your goal may be indeed to go ahead and create a symmetrical design. And what I mean by that is a design that is the same on either side. And that is totally fine. You can have that. That works really, really well for some characters. It can tend to look a little bit mechanical. Here I wanted to go for a mismatched appearance in Commander Slug's design. I wanted it to appear as though he put this armor together himself, rather than it being an established uniform that he was just given. And that's very much the same way in which I decided to design all of the upcoming characters that will be present within this comic book. I wanted to create some uniqueness between them, and I figured that if I gave them a little bit of variety in the designs in which I came up with for them themselves, then I could create that between them. So every character that you're going to see, it'll look as though they put their outfit together themselves. That once more, it's not a pre-established uniform that they're just given. Right? It's not exactly like the military. These guys aren't, as I said, official military soldiers. They are instead post-apocalyptic rebels, if anything. But every single organization of rebellion, I guess you could say, every single group of people, they need a leader, and that is exactly the role that Commander Slug steps into. Now, the arm that I'm rejigging right now was not previously working, unfortunately. I had to go back to the drawing board, completely erase it, and start again. I keep on flipping it back and forth, and the reason as to why I do that is to double-check this kind of thing, that everything is in its correct place. That all of the positioning of his body, the anatomy, it's all pulled together accurately, because this leads otherwise to visual inconsistencies. It leads to incorrections that, if you don't flip the canvas back and forward, you're not going to be able to notice them, because when you're working in that one perspective, you're going to get so hooked into what it is you're doing that you'll start to, so familiar with it that you'll start to miss maybe some of the mistakes that are subtle but kind of obvious at the same time, and maybe you just didn't notice them because when you become familiar with something, you tend to miss the details a lot more. In other words, what ends up happening is you notice the flaws a little bit less. You're familiar with it now. It's not new anymore. You're taking in now less information, and your brain works like that for a reason. It's to kind of manage the otherwise large amount of information it has to take in besides that item or that the particular subject matter that you are focused on at the point in time. Once it becomes familiar enough with any one thing, what you'll tend to find is your brain just kind of filters things out that it doesn't need to take as close a notice of anymore. But when you flip the canvas around, as you can see me doing right now, what ends up happening is your brain kind of gets jolted a little bit to attention, and all of a sudden it's like, what am I looking at now? Is it something new? It's a new interpretation of what I thought I was looking at, and all of a sudden those mistakes that are now present that you didn't notice before, you're able to see. And that's very, very important, because when all of this is done and your character goes to print, so to speak, when you've called it quits on the character, you've finished it, it's done and dusted, you want to make sure that it's at its most perfect representation that you could get it to. And the only way to do that, the best way that I know how to do that, is to hold your artwork up in front of a mirror if you're doing this traditionally, or to simply flip it in whatever drawing application you prefer to work in digitally. And that will allow you to spot those sneaky little mistakes that slip in underneath the radar, and you'll be able to end up, as a result, with a much better product in the end that, again, allows you to wind out with a character that you can be proud of, that you did your best work on. And for me, character design, especially for my comic book, of all things, is something that I stress out about. Why do I stress out about it? Because I know that this character is going to be redrawn by me again and again throughout the comic book that he's going to be featured in, from one page to the next. Every single panel, well, maybe not every single panel, but he's going to be featured in a lot of those panels. And so if his design doesn't work in any one of those, that means that I have slipped up. If I find that it doesn't make sense for him to be able to lift his arm up due to the shoulder pad design, for example, that I have given him, then I haven't done my job correctly as a character designer, because functionality is extremely important. Now, you want to weigh that up against whether or not the character looks cool, because if it's all function and no coolness, well, people are just going to be bored. It's going to be a dull-looking character, and that is probably even worse. So you want to go for a nice, even blend of the two. Make it functional, make it look cool, and if you can tick those two boxes, then you've probably got a decent-looking, memorable, classic character that people are going to fall in love with on your hands. But this is where probably I would argue the most important portion of your comic book is almost going to happen. I mean, this is the characters themselves that you're trying to create the visual representation of. And so it's very, very important. This is why concept artists in movies, in video games, and I wish it was the case in comic books, are paid the most amount of money out of every other production artist within that project, because everyone is going to be working from that concept. The director is going to be working from it. The storyboard artist is going to be working with those character designs. If it's a movie that involves a lot of CG, then the 3D modelers are going to be working from that concept art. So you got to make sure that if you are in charge of designing the characters for whatever project it is you're working on, that you're keeping this stuff in mind. You're keeping your eye on the ball. So now I'm going over the top of Commander Slug again, and as you can see, I've completely reinvented his shoulder pad design. I think that it not only possibly looks a little bit better, I think it looks a bit better, but it also works better as well. In terms of the amount of movement he will now be able to have within his arm as he lifts it up and down, you can see that I've now strapped the shoulder pads onto the belt that wraps around his body. I've also tried to make it look a little bit more modern in terms of the sci-fi appearance I've given it. So rather than that Mad Max type vibe, he now has more of a, I would say, if you've played the new Doom Eternal game, it's probably more comparable to that, or even Ghost in the Shell. I like that clean, nice look, and I think that given the fact I'm doing a sci-fi post-apocalyptic comic book, that is probably the kind of appearance that I should be going for. Now, I didn't really want to opt for the look of the Colonial Marines out of Aliens, even though that was an option, and I did have those up as reference throughout the design of Commander Slug here. I really wanted to avoid it. Why? Because I don't think there's a whole lot of uniqueness that you can incorporate into their look if you stick with that specifically. Like, in a military uniform, I mean, there's definitely things that you're going to expect. You're going to expect the vest with pouches. You're going to expect the helmet. Maybe the shoulder pads, maybe. He might be, the character might be wearing again, military gear, long sleeve top, pants, boots, but typical military type looking boots, and you could sci-fi that up a little bit, and I guess that's what I've done here, but I wanted a character that was a little bit more 90s than that. Again, a character that looked as though they'd found or developed this gear themselves, and that they had put it together without the aid of a larger organization or power to do it for them, because the primary powers of Earth that once existed have been obliterated by these alien invaders. Earth is no longer what it was. All the power has been stolen from humanity, and now really it's only these guys and a few other clusters that have joined forces that are able to stand up against the aliens and hopefully take back Earth before it's too late, before humanity becomes extinct. And now the kind of movies that I love that helped to inspire the idea for this comic book were, of course, movies from the 80s that I grew up with, and the early 90s as well. I really love RoboCop. That's where the idea for the main character kind of comes into play to an extent. I'm going to have him be refitted with these cybernetic enhancements, but the catch is that he's controlled now by those who he once fought beside, because the people who he once fought beside are now worried about him. They're like, look, is the alien DNA eventually going to completely take hold of our comrade here and turn him into the beast that we're afraid of having to fight later on down the track? And as much as they hate to do it, they got to fit him with a chip or some method of control in order to ensure that does not happen. But it essentially makes him their property now, and their weapon against the aliens. So, I thought that, given RoboCop kind of follows a similar theme, I thought that'd be fantastic. I also love Terminator, of course, big fan of Terminator, which is, instead of, essentially, in my comic book world, instead of machines taking over, it is aliens that have taken over and essentially done the exact same thing to humanity with a few extras, as I mentioned before. Now, also on top of that, I love the Fly, right? And so the alien DNA that is slowly taking hold of our main hero more and more, turning him into more creature than human. That was inspired by the Fly. You know, I want to have a scene where he's looking in the mirror and he's transforming, he's changing bit by bit, becoming less of the man that he once was and more of the creature that he ultimately will be. So that's going to be really fun and interesting to write that and to draw it out as well. And by the way, I have already done the thumbnails for every single page of the first issue. So once these character designs are done, I'm going to be jumping on to the final pages of issue 1, where I will be penciling them, inking them, and as you guessed it, I'm going to be recording that entire process and narrating every single video so that you can see how it comes together. And that's something that has been very, very important for me to be able to give you, because it's kind of the opus magnum of all my knowledge that I have captured, that I've taught myself and put into practice over the years. And you're going to get to see it in action, which is something that excites me. I hope that it excites you as well. Now you can see we've got a 3/4 view of Commander Slug's design here. We've also got a back 3/4 view, which pretty much covers all bases, you know, in a way, in a 3-dimensional sense. It shows us what the front of Commander Slug is going to look like, what the back of him will appear like, and also the sides at the same time. And then we've got the headshots there as well. Well, this is about it for Commander Slug's character design draft. And I say draft because I am going to take this and I'm actually going to go over the top of it at a later time, and I'm going to ink it out, turn it into a finished comic book illustration. And I'm really looking forward to showing you the process behind that. But first, I'm going to go through, I'm going to do character sketches for all of the other actors that will be featured within this book, and I'm going to show you how I go about developing them as well. So I can't wait to show you. I'm very, very excited about this project. Thanks so much for watching. And if you like more comic art tips, tricks, and tutorials, be sure to visit www.howtodrawcomics.net. Over on the site, you'll find a bunch of written tutorials, video tutorials. We've even got a podcast. And when you're ready to take your comic art skill set to the next level, I highly suggest you check out our selection of premium courses in the store. Alright, well that's it for today. Until next time, keep on drawing, keep on creating, and I'll see you in the next video.